Take a minute, take a deep breath. All right. Good morning, friends. This is Lindsay Cross, Government Relations Director with Florida Conservation Voters. Hope you're having a fantastic Friday. And for those of you that are Buccaneers fans, we're probably still enjoying that big victory on Sunday night, right? And I'm so honored to have my personal representative on the Zoom this morning, Representative Ben Diamond from House District 68 in Pinellas County. I want to welcome you to our legislator chat this morning. How are you, Rep. Diamond?
I'm doing great. It's awesome to see you, Lindsay. Thanks for having me on, and go Bucks. What a great week we've had.
That's right.
What a great year.
I know. We've had some great sports teams, over the years, but 2020 and 2021 have really been our year for championships.
That's right. Well, growing up here, I know we're going to talk about conservation issues and MCORs and all that, but since you brought up the Bucks, growing up here and going to Bucks games as a kid with my dad and seeing us have heartbreaking season after heartbreaking season, and quarterbacks like Vinny Testaverde just struggling. It was it's still sweet. And I was up in Tallahassee this past week. I just got back to St. Pete last night, but I was wearing my Bucks hat around up there because I was soaking it in. So
that's great. Yeah. Well, I'm originally from Detroit area and a Lions fan, so I know heartbreak. So it's nice to cheer for a winning team this season.
Yeah. Anyway, I could talk about sports all day, but I know you're going to talk about environmental issues.
Well, I couldn't, so that's where my knowledge ends, right there. All right. Yeah. So you're in District 68 in St. Petersburg and Pinellas County. We're surrounded by water. We love our natural environment here. Can you tell the conservation voters and folks watching a little bit about some of your conservation priorities and the things that your constituents talk to you about, what's important to them?
Sure, absolutely. Well, you hit the nail on the head. Growing up here in Pinellas County, spending as much time as we do out on the water and in our state parks and on our beaches, these are the things that make living in Florida special. And I've always been motivated and interested in what we can be doing to protect Florida's natural resources. I was so privileged to get to partner with you all back before I even ran for office on the Land and Water Conservation Amendment to our state constitution. And, we've had an ongoing struggle in Florida to prioritize the importance of protecting our natural resources and our water in particular. And we can talk more about that. Over the course of my service, I was privileged to be elected in 2016 to the State House. And over the course of my service, I've tried to advocate along with you. You've been an incredible advocate and Florida Conservation Voters for Florida Forever, which is our state's premier land and water conservation program. Very important program, a very well-run program by our Division of State Lands, and try to make sure that we're fully funding that program so that we can be doing more to protect our special places in Florida, and also doing more on resiliency planning and the threats of sea level rise and climate change. We live, as you said, we're surrounded by water here. We have water on 3 sides of us, and that's never going to change here in St. Pete. And there are neighborhoods in our community like Shore Acres that have been experiencing significant flooding in even small storms like Tropical Storm Ida, which came through a few months ago. And so there's just a lot more we need to be doing there on a policy front. And I'm really hopeful that this session we can start making some significant progress in those areas.
Yeah, certainly. More planning for resiliency and really going from the planning stage to implementation and action, and looking at the root causes of our climate crisis, which means reducing our reliance on dirty fossil fuels and switching to a just transition to renewable energy. Is anytime we're talking about resilience and climate change, we need to be talking about the causes and some of the mitigation strategies, not just the mitigation on the back end.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing I'll mention is that the real leaders in these efforts so far have been our leaders in local governments.
Mhm.
Our mayors, our county commissioners, they're on the front lines of this fight because they're paying for the infrastructure in our communities. And as you know, we have had some terrific leaders in Tampa Bay come together and form a regional resiliency coalition here, similar to what happened in South Florida. Those developed because we had really no statewide leadership in Tallahassee on these issues. And I am very concerned because I understand there's a move afoot now in the legislature to try to make those sort of regional efforts harder, similar to sort of these anti-home rule bills. And we have to be very cognizant of the fact that our local elected leaders are responding to real concerns in our communities, like what I mentioned earlier, the flooding that we've had in Shore Acres with these recent storms. I mean, these are not abstract or academic issues. I mean, these are real issues that are impacting the people we're serving.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you note the importance of some of these regional and local initiatives. We have seen an attack on home rule, and we know that it's important to make sure that people that are closest to the residents are empowered to make decisions. And so the idea of letting locals lead, whether it's in resiliency planning, of course, we can't do it on our own, but we all have to be coordinated and involved in that effort.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So with Florida Conservation Voters, we're really thrilled because we've been able to endorse you as one of our conservation leaders. And of course, your support of full funding for Florida Forever and our climate crisis. Do you have any key conservation initiatives that you're focused on this session?
Well, I think a lot of this is driven by our budget decisions, is what I've learned. I've learned that our priorities as a state are reflected in our budget. And for that reason, I've really made working on the budget a priority and a part of my service in the legislature. I'm privileged that the speaker appointed me to serve on the full appropriations committee of the House. The governor has recommended a budget that includes significant funding for resiliency, which I'm very pleased with. I think we've got to fully fund Florida Forever. I think we've got to really work on, funding for our beach programs, for our Florida Springs. All of these issues are tied to where are we putting our efforts as a state, and a lot of that is driven by the budget. The other thing I'll mention that I think is important that we get done this session, and in addition to making the right budgetary decisions, is the governor appointed initially and early in his term a chief resiliency officer, a statewide officer to work on these issues. She was a great appointment. Unfortunately, she did not stay long in state government. She left after only a few months on the job, and that position has been vacant. I think it's really important that we codify that position of chief resiliency officer in state law, that we fully fund an office, of people in state government to be working and coordinating these issues on a statewide basis, and that we get a gubernatorial appointee to lead that effort. And so I am spending time talking with folks in high places like the governor's office about that, and my colleagues on the budget committee. I hope we can come to some bipartisan agreement that we're going to make funding that position a priority, and I very much hope that the governor makes an appointment very quickly and we can build out an office there to coordinate a lot of this work.
Yeah, that's great to hear that. It needs to be a priority, and that starts with having someone who's dedicated to that and has the resources to work with these regional compacts and some of the smaller communities that maybe don't have that expertise in-house, but can benefit from some of the examples that have been done in places like Tampa Bay and Southeast Florida. So
That's right.
thanks
That's
for
right.
that. Another issue I want to talk about. So when you're talking about the budget this year, I know that you and other your colleagues in the House and over on the Senate are going to have to make some really tough budget decisions because of the impact to our state revenue due to COVID-19. Are there any items in the budget you think are a no-brainer? Let's get rid of these and use that money in a different way.
Yeah, well, I mean, one that I know you wanted to talk about that we've been talking about for some time is this MCOR's toll roads project. You know, I did not support that bill in 2019. You know, the proposal is to build these 3 new toll roads across parts of Florida and rural parts of Florida. And Lindsay, you've been a great leader on this issue. I know you've been on the task force that was appointed to study this idea, and so you're a real subject matter expert. But from a and you know, we can talk about some of the environmental issues just from a budget perspective. From a fiscal issue, you know, I'm just concerned that the money is just not there when you're looking at other critical needs that we have as a state. You know, I mean, we need to decide that we're going to prioritize funding public education, that we're going to prioritize funding affordable housing. We're in a serious public health crisis, okay, obviously, with the coronavirus. And we have really, really felt the impact as a state of having gutted our public health infrastructure. We felt that in terms of the challenges we've had with testing initially, and then with contact tracing, and now with our vaccine distribution challenges. And so, you know, when you look at the challenges we're facing as a state, I just don't think this MCOR's project, first of all, it wasn't well vetted to begin with in terms of the transportation planning or needs perspective. It deviated from that normal process of having our agency experts drive the transportation decisions. It was more of a political decision. And it's just something that we can't afford right now. So I'm spending time, as you know, talking to my colleagues on the budget committee about unwinding that and getting the money that we have appropriated to the Florida Department of Transportation, which is not an insignificant amount of money, back into our general revenue fund so that we can prioritize these other needs that I just candidly think are more important right now, given what we're facing.
Well, I'm so appreciative of you, the leadership that you and Senator Polsky have shown in introducing bills to repeal MCORs and put the money back into general revenue. House Bill 763 and Senate Bill 1030. You both introduced that last week, and I know that you had a press conference where you were able to talk to some people who are in some of these rural communities that may be impacted. Specifically a commissioner from Levy County, where they took the initiative to pass a no-build resolution at their county level because they had concerns about it. There was also a farmer who talked about how it may impact him and his family and his livelihood. What are some of the impacts that you think these roads will have if they're built on some of our small towns and these rural communities?
Well, you know, one of the things you learn in this role is that you really have to spend time listening to everybody. And it's been really interesting to me getting to serve in the legislature because I do spend a lot of time now driving around Florida. I drive every week, early Monday, up through some of those communities, you know, along US 19, Levy County, Chiefland. And I stop at, you know, I have my little places that I like to stop, my little fruit stand, my little barbecue place. And they're very special communities, as you know. I know you spend a lot of time out in rural Florida too. And what's interesting is that not every community in Florida wants to look like Orlando. You know, I mean, we do have great big cities in this state, but we also have some very special small towns, and they want to preserve that character. And that's very important to them. And the folks that you mentioned that I invited to be a part of that are folks that I've just been hearing from that have been talking about that. And this is not to say that we're sort of anti-road or anti-transportation planning. I mean, the state is growing. We have to be thoughtful about that growth. We have to plan for that growth. The State Department of Transportation has a process to do that. What is concerning to me about this proposal, again, is it didn't go through that process. It went through a political process. And as a result, there really isn't the transportation needs there. I mean, one of the things I like most about that drive that I do every week is just how quiet it is. It's some time to think and get ready for the week. And there's really not many people on those roads, um, uh, going up there. So I think that, preserving the character of those communities is really important.
Well, thank you for having an eye on that. When we talk about choice in terms of how we live and where we live, I think it's important that the people in rural communities get a say in how their community looks. And we know that, up to 330 new miles of roads would change those communities forever, as well as having impacts to our water and our wildlife and really all of us as taxpayers. When you're talking about the idea of the budget and some of the DOT projects, I noticed that there was an article, I think in the Tampa Bay Times this week, where you pointed out some infrastructure projects in the Tampa Bay area that affect our area. I also saw a presentation by DOT that suggests that over the next several years, there's going to be reductions in their revenue by about $2.88 billion. And that just this year alone, there have been 77 projects that have been impacted, with the majority of them, I think 54 of them, that have been actually removed from the work plan as a result of these losses in revenue, whether it's tolls or money coming from general revenue. Are there projects that are going to affect your constituents that may suffer while MCORS continues to have kind of this unchecked, blank check, if you will, being
Well,
spent?
it is a blank check in the sense that, these big projects, these big transportation projects have a tendency to cost far more than originally projected. And there's an organization in Tallahassee called Florida Tax Watch, which is really a nonpartisan organization, but it's about trying to recognize that we have to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. We don't have unlimited money to spend. It's not our money, it's the people's money. And we have to make sure it's being spent wisely. And TaxWatch did a study on this, and that was what they concluded with these toll roads, was that there really was the possibility of a lot of money being spent on something that was unnecessary. And we're seeing the impacts here, in terms of other transportation projects that I think have been identified as critical. Those projects are getting delayed because we are in this sort of budget shortfall position. So for instance, like several people have been reaching out to me, the St. Petersburg Chamber and others, about the 275 West Shore interchange. That is, as we all know, living in Tampa Bay, I've got to get to a lunch here in a few minutes over in Tampa, but that's that is the key interchange in Tampa Bay. And the governor 2 years ago announced that there was going to be a big, multi-billion-dollar effort to improve that interchange. And then, DOT came out and said, well, we've got to push that back several years. And that's what I'm talking about. I mean, are we really identifying the right priorities in terms of where we're spending our taxpayer dollars on transportation? And I am planning to sit down with our district secretary at FDOT, and hopefully with the secretary as well, to talk about some of these issues in more detail over the coming weeks, because I am concerned, when we live in a busy place like our community, that we're making the right investments.
Well, thank you for keeping those things, the priorities of our state, in mind. I know that we just have a couple minutes. I want to see if there's any questions that people have submitted through Facebook, through our Florida Conservation Voters page. But while we're waiting on that, are there any things that the Floridians, we've had people, thousands of people who've been engaged in the fight against the roads to ruin throughout the task force process, urging the governor to veto the bill back in 2019. Now that we're going into the legislative session starting on March 2nd, what can people do to be involved? Is there anything related to your bill? How can they support this effort to repeal the roads?
Right. Well, I think that, we would love to have broad bipartisan support for our legislation. I've spoken to a number of colleagues on both sides of the aisle that I think are with us. And I think the old-fashioned, pick up the phone and call your representative, call your senator, send an email, send a message on social media, if you happen to see this discussion, and just help us spread the word that we're not sure this is an appropriate use of the limited resources we have right now, and that there are other things that we need to prioritize. I think that would be very helpful. Folks really do listen, particularly to the people in their communities. And the old-fashioned letter writing campaign, telephone campaigns, I think they're very effective. I mean, I certainly take note when I start hearing from a bunch of constituents on an issue, and I know that my colleagues generally do as well.
Good. So everyone pick up your cell phones, tweet, email your representatives. If you live in District 68, you don't need to do that. Thanks
No, you still need to do that. I still want to hear from you.
The leadership of Rep. Diamond, and over on the East Coast in the Palm Beach area, Senator Tina Polsky. So thank you again for your leadership on this issue, repealing the roads. Florida Conservation Voters, as we move into session, will give you action ways that you can be involved in this, whether it's contacting your legislators directly, asking them to co-sponsor, or other things that are related to our core conservation pillars. This has been our Public Lands Week, gearing up for the full session. And so it's been such a pleasure to have you on talking today, because this is, I know, one of the most important issues for people around the state. Conservation voters are fired up about the roads. They want to protect what is special about our state, our wild areas, our wildlife, and really use our money for what our true priorities are this year. So thank you for your leadership. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So I know you got to get to a lunch, so have safe travels getting over to Tampa.
Thanks for your work and advocacy. It's great to see you. Have
Good
a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, Rep. Diamond.